Luka Dončić, wearing purple and gold. Yeah, you heard that right. And we're not talking fantasy basketball here, not some video game scenario.
Nope.
Our source today lays out a case for something potentially brewing right now, something they're calling maybe the most shocking, most controversial trade move in, well, modern NBA history.
Yeah, they're not treating it like smoke at all. They think there's a real fire there. That dramatic language, the whispers, the tension. It really sets the tone for how this source sees the whole thing.
It really does.
Yeah.
So look, this isn't just some random internet rumor we picked up. This deep dive today, it's specifically into the possibility, however wild it sounds, of the Lakers acquiring Luka Dončić. And we're doing it by unpacking one particular source.
That's right. The source is titled Lakers Stealing Luka Dončić, How and Why. And our job here is to pull out the core arguments they made, exactly how and why they believe this scenario, which seems kind of unbelievable on the surface, isn't just possible, but maybe even a power move being actively looked at.
We're digging into their perspective, their evidence, their conclusion.
Exactly. So we'll walk through their take on the alleged problems down in Dallas first.
Then we'll pivot to how they view the Lakers, their history, their strategy, their current motivations.
And then there's the Kyrie Irving angle, which the source gives a huge role. And finally, the sort of behind-the-scenes stuff, the influence they claim is pushing this. Ready to jump in?
Let's do it. Okay, so starting with Dallas, the source doesn't mince words at all. They hit it right away. The Mavericks have failed Luka Dončić, flat out. No sugarcoating. That's a pretty strong opening shot.
It is a very direct accusation. And they try to back it up with specific points, things they see as evidence of this failure. First off, the playoff record since that 2022 Western Conference Finals appearance.
Right, basically 0 playoff success and then 0 series wins.
Yeah. And they link that directly to the constant shuffling of players around Luka. Porzingis, Dinwiddie, Finney-Smith, now Kyrie.
A revolving door, almost.
Pretty much. The source argues none of these moves really led to building what they call a legitimate dynasty around him. It's been more like patch jobs.
And they really hammer the point about his age.
Right.
Luka's 25.
Exactly. They say he's wasting prime years because, in their view, the front office just hasn't shown they understand how to build specifically around his talent. And get this, the source actually calls this failure a fact, not just their opinion or some narrative.
Wow. Okay. And it's not just the team's wins and losses or roster moves they focus on. They also dig into Luka's behavior, his public persona.
Yeah, they bring up something interesting. They ask, what's more, Luka has never publicly committed to retiring a Maverick. Ever noticed that?
That's a specific detail.
And they claim his body language in press conferences seems cold. Maybe even his tone comes off as passive-aggressive sometimes.
Like that reported response he gives when asked about the team's future.
Yeah.
Just a flat, we'll see.
Right. The source definitely reads a lot into those moments. They interpret that as, not exactly a vote of confidence.
So putting it all together, the playoff drought, the roster churn, these alleged behavioral cues.
The source concludes, pretty bluntly again, that's not a franchise player who's happy. That's a superstar plotting his escape.
Plotting his escape. That's intense. Okay, so that's the picture the source paints of the Dallas situation. Thinking about those claims they make, what do you make of it all? Does any of that resonate with how you've seen things unfold? Just putting it out there for you listening.
It's definitely a compelling narrative they build, focusing on signs of friction. Okay, let's switch lanes now, because the source then turns its full attention to the Lakers.
The Lakers.
Yeah.
And the source describes them in quite flattering terms, strategically speaking. They say LA is a franchise that knows how to play chess while everyone else is playing Connect 4.
Yeah, that paints a picture, doesn't it? It sets up their argument that the Lakers are always thinking bigger, always planning these major moves.
And they list the receipts, so to speak.
Right. They point to luring LeBron James when a lot of people were skeptical it could happen. Then the Anthony Davis trade, giving up a huge haul, what the source calls flipping half the league to get their guy.
And they even spin the Russell Westbrook situation, which, let's be honest, looked like a disaster for a while.
Yeah, but the source highlights that the Lakers managed to trade him away and still made it back to the Western Conference Finals. So it fits this narrative of them being, strategic even when things look messy.
Always maneuvering. Okay, so based on that history.
The source asks the logical next question, right? So why not Luka? Why not now? And they argue that timing makes perfect sense for LA.
What are the key reasons they give for why now?
Well, number one, LeBron James is aging out, as they put it. It's inevitable.
True.
Number two, the Lakers are, in the source's words, desperate to stay relevant post-LeBron. They need that next pillar.
And that connects to the third point, needing a new face for their massive global brand, someone for the next generation of fans.
Exactly. And who better, according to this source, than Luka? They call him the perfect superstar for the Hollywood spotlight.
Okay, and why Luka specifically? What makes him the perfect fit in their eyes?
They tick off a few boxes. He's European. They even mention Magic Johnson apparently called for a European star years ago.
Interesting.
He's obviously flashy on the court, box office appeal. And maybe most importantly for LA, they say he has that I don't care swagger that they think LA fans just eat up.
So you've got this narrative. Superstar, potentially unhappy in Dallas, meets a powerhouse franchise in LA, actively hunting for its next global icon. The source is really drawing a straight line between the two.
A very straight line. But wait, there's another layer they add. A catalyst they think is speeding things up. And that's the dynamic between Luka and Kyrie Irving.
Ah, Kyrie. The source has a pretty provocative label for his role in this, right?
They sure do. They call Kyrie the poison pill that starts it all.
Wow. Poison pill. That's really strong. What exactly do they mean by that?
Well, the source basically argues very forcefully that the Luka-Kyrie backcourt was never going to work, and everyone with a brain knew it. They see it as fundamentally flawed from day one.
Okay, and what are their reasons for saying it was doomed? Why wouldn't it work, according to them?
They list three main things. One, two ball-dominant guards, just a tough fit stylistically.
Classic issue.
Two, no real defenders on the perimeter when they play together. Big problem in today's NBA.
Definitely.
And three, they kind of blame the front office, saying they were afraid to say no to superstars, which allowed this pairing to happen in the first place.
So it's not just about X's and O's, it's also about maybe a management issue in their view.
That seems to be the implication. The source suggests Kyrie was brought in initially almost out of desperation, calling him a ticking time bomb acquired to keep Luka happy, or at least keep him there.
And re-signing Kyrie last summer didn't solve the underlying issues, according to this source.
Not at all. They claim it just brought that inherent tension back to the forefront. They paint a picture where Luka isn't really thriving with Kyrie, he's just surviving.
Surviving. And do they offer any, specific examples of this tension?
Yeah, they mention alleged stuff like eye rolls on the court between them, a general lack of chemistry that they say is visible. And they even bring up how many times Luka has supposedly stormed off the court this season. Now, whether that's directly related is interpretation, but the source uses it as evidence.
Right, those are specific details they point to, interpreted through their lens of frustration.
Absolutely. And the source's final take on the duo is crystal clear. This is not a duo. This is a slow breakup.
A slow breakup.
Wow, and crucially, they say this perceived internal friction, the slow breakup, is exactly why the Lakers are watching closely.
Okay, so the source is arguing that the potential implosion of the Luka-Kyrie experiment is basically opening the door, creating the opportunity for a team like the Lakers to swoop in.
That's the argument. It's presented as the key accelerant.
Makes sense within their narrative. So for you listening, what are your thoughts on that analysis of the Luka-Kyrie pairing from this source? Do you buy their argument that it was inherently flawed, or are there other ways to look at it?
Yeah, it's a very specific, maybe even critical take on that partnership. Okay, so that brings us to the last major piece of the puzzle, according to this source. The force is working behind the curtains.
Right, the stuff that's not happening on the court. The source is pretty direct here too, aren't they?
Yeah.
They say something like, you really think this is random? Come on.
Exactly. They're strongly implying this isn't just teams and players, but external influencers are actively involved, maybe even pulling strings.
And the main focus of that influence, according to the source.
It centers heavily on Rich Paul and Clutch Sports. The source makes a massive claim that agencies like Clutch now wield more influence than entire front offices. That's a statement.
It is. And they see this influence as potentially being leveraged to steer Luka towards LA.
And they list specific connections they believe are driving this potential move. What are those?
Okay, they mention first LeBron's relationship with Luka described as tight. Then there's the idea that Anthony Davis needs a successor, eventually someone to pass the torch to.
Right, the long-term planning aspect.
Plus, they bring in Lakers owner Jeannie Buss, claiming she's all in on one more Superteam run.
And connecting it back to the agency angle, they state that Clutch specifically has been pushing global names to the Lakers since 2015. They see a pattern.
And there was one more specific move they highlighted, wasn't there? Something about Luka's representation.
Yes, a really key detail for their argument. Luka recently signing with WME, William Morris Endeavor, one of the biggest, most powerful talent agencies, especially in Hollywood.
And the source sees that WME signing as
Well,
significant.
oh, absolutely. They flat out say it was not a coincidence. They interpret that move as strategic branding for LA.
Branding for LA.
Yeah, like positioning him for the endorsements, the media opportunities, everything that comes with being a superstar in that specific market. They see it as positioning for a massive market leap.
Okay, so the picture this source paints in this final section is, it's not just about basketball. It's about powerful agents, massive talent agencies, maybe orchestrating career paths for maximum brand value and market exposure, potentially aligning stars with powerhouse franchises like the Lakers.
That's precisely the implication. It adds a whole other dimension to the potential the business and influence side of things.
All right, that covers a lot of ground. Let's try and bring this deep dive together and summarize the main arguments we've pulled from this specific source. Lakers stealing Luka Dončić, how and why?
Okay, so first, the source argues the Mavericks have fundamentally failed Luka. They point to a lack of playoff success, constant roster changes around him, and they interpret his behavior as unhappy, suggesting he might be looking for a way out.
Right. Then they shift focus to the Lakers. They paint LA as this historically strategic franchise always making bold moves. And right now, they're supposedly desperate for a new global superstar as LeBron winds down, with Luka seen as the absolute perfect fit for LA's market and brand.
Then there's the Kyrie Irving factor. The source calls that pairing a poison pill doomed from the start because of, conflicting styles and maybe some front office issues. This tension, they argue, is making Luka just survive, not thrive, and it's creating an opening.
And finally, the source points fingers behind the scenes. They suggest powerful forces, specifically naming Rich Paul, Clutch Sports, and now WME through Luka's signing, are potentially orchestrating things. They see that WME deal as a deliberate, strategic move towards LA about branding and market positioning.
So just to be clear, this whole deep dive was about unpacking this source's specific story, their explanation for how and why this Luka to Lakers scenario is even being talked about as a potential shocking power move.
Exactly. We're relaying their narrative, their arguments. Now, thinking about that last part, the claims about agents and agencies having so much power, driving these huge moves for branding, it leads to a bigger question, maybe something for you to think about. What does this source's perspective suggest about where the real power lies in the NBA today? Is it still mostly with the teams, the front offices, or is it shifting more towards the superstars themselves, their agents, these huge talent agencies, all focused on strategic positioning and global brands?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question about the modern league. And if these kinds of behind-the-scenes forces, as alleged by the source, could actually pull off a move this massive, what would the ripple effects even be? How might that change how teams are built, how the league operates?
Definitely something to chew on. We'd genuinely love to hear what you think about that. Does this source's view on power dynamics ring true to you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments or wherever you engage with us.
Yeah, your insights always add a lot to the conversation. We really appreciate hearing from you.
And hey, if you found this deep dive into the possibility of Luka ending up in LA interesting, maybe learn something about this particular source's take, do us a favor, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already.
It really helps us keep digging into these kinds of complex, sometimes controversial, but always fascinating topics for you. Thanks for tuning in.